You can adjust the colors of your image in multiple ways. So let's start with color balance tool. New adjustment layer, color balance. And this tool is quite flexible. It allows you to change the colors of shadows, midtones and highlights. And for each one of these areas you can adjust 3 different sliders. So for example, if you want to make the highlights more yellow, you bring the slider to the left, maybe add some reds, and finally tweak between pinks and greens. Okay, same thing for midtones. Maybe make them a bit whiter, and give them more cyan and green. And for shadows, let's make it a bit more blue and give it more cyan. Usually when the highlights are warm or yellowish, the shadows should be colder or more blue. And it works the opposite way as well. If your shadows are warm, usually the highlights should be a bit colder or more neutral. That's just the way things usually work. So this color balance tool is quite useful for getting rid of color casts or creating color casts or shifting some colors in particular areas of the image, shadows, midtones or highlights. There's this preserve luminosity checkbox which I recommend using. I recommend leaving on all the time, since otherwise you can get distorted whites. Okay, so once you're happy with the adjustment, but maybe you think it's a bit too strong, you can bring it down or duplicate it to make it 2 times stronger. Okay, so that's the color balance tool. And the next one is photo filter. And photo filter allows you to add some sort of color to the whole image, make it stronger or weaker. And it also has this preserve luminosity option here. If you disable it, you can see that the whites get clipped and they become this color. And it's usually best to leave this option on. And the color filters are named like they would for real photo cameras, like warming filter 85 or 81 or whatever, and you have these warming, cooling filters and some filters for removing or increasing color casts like cyan, blue, violet, magenta, sepia, and so on. And again, you can adjust the opacity, adjust the density, and it's quite easy to do so. So the next method to change the colors of the image is by creating an empty layer and filling it with some sort of a color. Let's say we want to add some purples. Okay, fill it in, change the blending mode to soft light, and adjust the opacity. Okay, and the advanced technique for this would be using a copy of your image as a mask. Sorry. The saturated copy of your image as a mask for this color cast layer, and this way you can make sure that it affects mostly the light areas or the dark areas. In this case it mostly affects the light areas. If you invert the mask, it affects mostly the dark areas, so that's something to play around with if you want to make this adjustment for a specific brightness range of your image. Okay, and you can use curves or levels on that mask to adjust that proportion of whites and darks, also the contrast. Okay, so that's an advanced method you can use for overlaying a color. soft light, and overlay also works. It just gives a slightly different effect. And so those are basic color adjustments. Forgot to mention hue and saturation, of course, which is a very basic adjustment for shifting the hues of all the colors at the same time. And it's usually best to use it only on a specific object which is masked out, or if you use it on the whole image, don't go overboard and use something like -7 to +7 and not really that much more, since it's not going to look too realistic. Okay, that's for the hue. As for the saturation, feel free to bump it up or down as you see fit. Okay, so make it a bit more vibrant by increasing the saturation. You can also change the saturation. Well, not exactly the saturation, but the vibrance of the image with the vibrance adjustment layer, which can make your image more vibrant, as well as adjust the saturation. And these adjustments are pretty similar, but there is some sort of a slight difference between them. Try them out and see which one works better. And I think the vibrance keeps the image a bit more natural. And then the saturation makes it sort of toxic and crazy. Okay, so the vibrance is a bit more subtle. And finally, we have one more color adjustment method, which is very flexible. You can get very cool effects with it, but most people don't even know it exists, or even if they do know it exists, they don't use it since it's a bit more complicated than the other methods. And this method is, again, the curves adjustment layer. And basically this time we're not going to use the RGB adjustment, which affects all three color channels at the same time, and I mean red, green and blue. We're going to use different adjustments for different colors. So for the red channel, let's say we wanna make the midtones a bit more red, maybe the highlights as well. And we want to go to the green channel, make the midtones slightly more green, and the highlights more green. And when combined with the red curve, we boosted both the red and green, and as a result, those highlights became more yellow. Okay, and for the blues, let's say I want to lift the blues up, simultaneously brightening the dark colors of the image and making them more blue. And these adjustments are trickier to use since you need to keep in mind that they all work together, and they don't affect only the color, they also affect the brightness of the image. So lifting those blues up not only increases the blue color, but it also makes those pixels brighter or lighter. Okay, so experiment with it a bit. It requires a bit of practice to get exactly what you want, but you can get some pretty cool effects, especially for those vintage or heavily stylized images like I have this one right here at the moment. And if the effect is too strong, just adjust the opacity. Okay, also check out the bonus curve presets I've included along with this tutorial, and there's also a quick lesson on how to use them.